If you're just catching up with the new Wilds of Eldraine set, there's probably some things with the mechanics and the set in general that you might not know yet. So what we're going to do today is to go through the mechanics in the set. That's the role tokens, bargain, celebration, and adventure, and how they work, and maybe some tricks you can use with those as well. And I'm going to show you the 3 infinite combos that have been discovered in the set so far. So stay tuned for that. Let's go. Welcome back to the channel. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And right, let's get into looking at the Wilds of Eldraine cards. We're going to talk about the mechanics of the set first. And the first one we're going to talk about is the role tokens. So the role tokens are a token aura that can be created and put onto the battlefield by different other spells you've got. So we're going to look at the role tokens, and I'm going to do this in order, starting with the least useful one that I think there is, and we're going to end up on the one that I think can be the best. So the first one I'm going to go with is the Young Hero role token. So the Young Hero token is an aura that gives a creature, whenever this creature attacks, if its toughness is 3 or less, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It still can be very useful, but it's not useful at all on a creature that has 3 toughness or more to start with, because it just won't do anything apart from making that creature enchanted, modified. It won't actually add anything else to it. And a lot of the other role tokens add +1/+1 anyway. So even if this is put onto a 2/2 and it attacks, becomes a 3/3, that's only as good as the base benefit you get from the other role tokens anyway. If you put it on a 1/1, okay, it can get to a 3/3. I mean, it can go a little bit bigger, but it can't really go past that. So this kind of runs out of usefulness pretty quickly. It might be good for some aggro decks, but because it's only going to give you value in the first couple of turns, maybe. But apart from that, when your creature gets to 3 toughness, this token's not going to do anything at all. The best thing about this one, I guess, is that when the role is taken away, like if it's been replaced by something else or been destroyed, the creature has +1/+1 counters on it, so it's not getting the benefit from the role token, which I guess means if it goes away, the creature keeps the benefit, so that's probably the best thing about it. Apart from that, yeah, it's not that exciting. Okay, so the next role token we're going to look at is the Wicked role token. So the Wicked token gives your creature +1/+1 as a basic benefit to start with. And when this aura is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So it's good that you get the +1/+1 automatically. And that extra 1 life isn't going to make a huge difference in the majority of decks. It's basically just guaranteeing you 1 extra damage, because even if the opponent destroys the token, it technically goes to the graveyard, and then the opponent loses a life. If the opponent exiles the creature this is attached to, then this token will still go to the graveyard because it just comes away from the creature, and then the opponent still loses 1 life anyway. So it's a way to guarantee a little bit of extra damage, but 1 point of damage here or there is not going to be the thing that makes the biggest difference in the majority of games. Now, the best thing about the Wicked token is, I think, the ability to use the Twisted Sewer Witch, because when the Twisted Sewer Witch enters, you create a 1/1 black creature token, and then for each rat you control, you create a Wicked role token attached to that rat. So although 1 damage isn't going to necessarily turn the tide of a game, if you have maybe 5 rats at this point, and you cast the Sewer Witch, then you've pretty much got an additional 5 damage that's going to get through, and it makes all your 1/1 rats into 2/2 rats, so that's going to help a lot as well. So this is only really a good benefit if you can create a lot of them, and the Twisted Sewer Witch is one really good way of doing that. So the next one I'm going to look at is the Royal Role token. So with the Royal Role, it gives the enchanted creature +1/+1, and it gives them Ward 1. And Ward 1's going to really help you to keep your creatures alive from spot removal, because it makes them slightly more expensive to target. but it's only going to make a big difference at the beginning of the game when the opponent has fewer lands, access to less mana, and it's going to make it more tricky for them to target. But later on in the game, when there's a lot more land on the battlefield, your opponent is going to be able to target your creature easy enough anyway, and the extra one isn't really going to slow them down. And if you get to around 5 mana, they're probably going to wipe the board anyway, if that's the kind of deck they're playing, and then the ward one doesn't do anything at all. So it's only really good towards the beginning of the game, but if you can stop your opponent from removing one of your creatures because they're short of 1 mana, you might be able to hit them another turn or two with it, so that might help you get ahead just enough to be able to win a game, possibly. So the next one I want to look at is the Sorcerer token. Now the Sorcerer token gives the creature +1/+1, and whenever the creature attacks you get to scry 1. So scrying is really, really useful, especially if you have a repeatable source of it. So if you can do this every turn, it's going to help you find lands. If you're trying to get lands, it can help you filter away lands if you're trying to find other spells. And if you have 1 or 2 sorcerer tokens over a couple of creatures, being able to scry 1 multiple times, it's going to make a huge difference, making sure the next card you draw is the one you want and not the card that does nothing for you, depending on what stage the game is at and what you need to be able to do. And I especially like the Spellbook Vendor because you get to basically put a sorcerer token onto something every turn just by paying 1 mana, which isn't bad, just giving your creature +1/+1 for the extra 1 mana, but being able to scry 1 as well, going to make a big difference when you're attacking with multiple creatures and just making sure you draw the right card next. So this is my third favorite role token. So let's go on to my second favorite, and it's going to be the monster one, the monster token. Now this is close between this and the other one as my first pick, but I really like giving creatures trample because there are so many creatures that are really strong but just don't have trample. So if you can give a creature +1/+1 and trample, and that trample is semi-permanent, it's not just a combat trick for 1 turn, and it's going to help you push through lots and lots of damage, especially if you have something like a big bunnycorn that's going to do lots of damage, or any other big creature, or something with double strike, and you want to make sure it doesn't get blocked by a 1/1, well then Trample's going to really help out with that. And if it's a creature that has some extra effect when it does combat damage to the opponent, something like Glisser Sunslayer, then you want to make sure it doesn't get blocked by something. They're really not going to want to block this if it's got trample as well. And if you can get this onto a creature that has Death Touch, and Death Touch and Trample work really, really well together, because if you're attacking with a 10/10 that has Death Touch and Trample, and your opponent blocks with a 10/10, it doesn't block all the damage. You only do 1 damage to their creature and 9 more damage to the player. So Trample is just a great effect to be able to put on anything. So that's why this one makes it to my second favorite role token. And then my favorite is Cursed. Now, Cursed is a really interesting one because Cursed is an aura, is a token, a role that you put on your opponent's creature. Although I guess maybe you could put it on your creature. Well, you can. There's some other ways you can put it on your creature. You can cast Cursed Courtier, and it creates a cursed token attached to itself. We also have the Spiteful Hexmage that comes in with a cursed token on itself as well. So it gives a creature base power and toughness 1/1. So it's kind of like a legitimate business person kind of thing. It doesn't take away any abilities that the creature has. It just makes it a 1/1. And obviously, if it has +1 counters on it, then they're still going to take effect on top of the 1/1 base power and toughness that it has. So there's some ways of getting around this. If you put it on one of your opponent's creatures, they can still get around it in different ways. But it can take any huge creature or anything you like at all, just turn it into a 1/1. And it's going to really help slow down the opponent. It's going to make some things also susceptible to cut down. So if your opponent has some kind of, I don't know, an Atali, and you manage to put a cursed token on their Atali, you can suddenly kill an Atali with a cut down. So that's one reason why I really like the cursed token. And it's interesting how with blue, you can basically attach it to your opponent, but with the white card here and the black card, it comes onto your own creature. Now, the thing is, you can only have one role that you own attached to one of your creatures. So you can have multiple creatures with different roles on it, but each creature can only have a maximum of one on it that you control. So if you have a Spiteful Hexmage and you put the Cursed token onto it, if you then got a monster token and put that on the Spiteful Hexmage, then the Cursed token disappears. So you can actually get rid of them pretty easily if you just have other role tokens that you can put on. And it's really difficult for your opponent to be able to remove a Cursed token that's been put on them. So if you put a Cursed token on one of your opponent's creatures, they can still add another one of the role tokens onto theirs because you can own the Cursed token that's on their creature, and they can own a different role token that's on their creature. So there's only a limit on the number of role tokens that can be attached to a creature from the same player. So they can be attached from different players. And sometimes enchantments are difficult to remove. There isn't a huge amount of cards that will remove enchantments, and not everyone always plays them. So if you get a cursed token on one of your opponent's creatures, they might just be stuck with it on there. So I think that's why the cursed token is my favorite one. There's a few other things with all the role tokens that it's important to know because there's some ways it interacts with other enchantment synergy cards and some ways it doesn't react. So we've got Hallowed Haunting, which is not from Eldraine, so let's take that off. Hallowed Haunting. So whenever you cast an enchantment spell, triggers Hallowed Haunting. With role tokens, we're not casting an enchantment spell. You're probably casting a creature, a sorcery, or an instant, or it can be from another enchantment, like with Witch's Vanity. So there are different reasons for being able to create enchantment tokens, but you're not casting an enchantment spell because it doesn't have the enchantment type on the card that you're actually casting, unless it does. But for the majority of role tokens, it will be an instant, or sorcery, or creature that creates them. So we're not casting enchantment spells. It will not trigger anything that says when you cast an enchantment spell. But we do still have an enchantment entering the battlefield. So if we have a look at Calyx, a constellation is the mechanic that basically says whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield. So with Calyx, we are creating role tokens. They are entering the battlefield, so it will trigger anything else that has the constellation effect or says whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield. So if we look at like Generous Visitor, it works when you cast an enchantment spell, so it doesn't work with that. If we look at Kami of Transience, which is over here, it's whenever you cast an enchantment spell, not when one enters the battlefield. So you have to keep an eye on the exact text in the rules. There are some that will happen when you cast an enchantment spell, and some when the enchantment enters the battlefield. And there are some that are very specific on auras. So we've got whenever an aura enters the battlefield. And let me see, it's in just Wilds of Eldraine, and it's a Tangle Span Lookout. It's not whenever any enchantment enters, it's whenever an aura enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. So again, these things are very slightly different. There are some enchantments that are not auras, and there are some enchantments that are auras. So like Ossification would be an aura, but Seal from Existence is not an aura. So it's really important to look at the types of enchantment you're casting if you're looking at when these different abilities get triggered. So that's really important to know. Also, it works really well with the celebration mechanic, which is one we're going to look at very soon. In fact, let's have a look at it now. So, celebration is the next mechanic we're going to look at. And celebration basically is whenever 2 or more non-land permanents have entered the battlefield under your control in this turn. So it could be that you're casting 2 creatures. It could be that you cast a creature and have a role token is produced. It could be that you've made treasure tokens. It could be that you put out a saga that then creates a creature. Anything at all that creates 2 different non-land permanents will trigger the celebration rule. And as you can see here, this does not cover many different colors. This only covers white and red cards. So the main one, I guess, in the celebration style of play would be Ash Party Crasher because it's red and white. and you get to add extra +1 counters onto Ash and its haste. So it's a very aggro-centric mechanic. The majority of the benefits from Celebration will be adding power to something, giving something double strike, making something have 1/1 and trample, giving something lifelink and +1 as well. So a lot of it is just creating extra damage. Godric is maybe my favorite one because it goes from being a 3/3 haste to a 4/4 flying dragon with the ability to fire breathe or add an extra +1 damage. So yes, it's a very, very aggro-centric, damage-centric ability. And there are various different things you can use to help you trigger the celebration mechanic as often as possible. So, and you have to pay attention to when it happens. So, wedding announcement, which is not in Eldraine, will create a 1/1 for you at the end of your turn, which is not any good for celebration because you want it to happen before combat usually, or at some point earlier on in your turn. You don't want it happening right at the end. But if you have something like Skorel's Hive, then this creates an extra 1/1 Phyrexian Might at the beginning of your turn or in your upkeep. So that's going to help you celebrate a bit more and trigger all those abilities in your cards. There's also other things like Elspeth or other planeswalkers that can create extra creatures. So if you put out Elspeth and then you +1, that's 2 different non-land permanents entering the battlefield. That's going to trigger it as well. So lots of different ways you can create more than one non-land permanent entering. And you can do it without very much mana investment as well, because you could have something like, not it sees much play, but things like Black Market Tycoon, that when you tap it, you create a treasure token. So you can create non-land permanents without investing any mana. But you have to look out for ways of doing it, but there are different ways you can do that. So that's all for the celebration mechanic. It's a pretty straightforward one. We're next going to look at Bargain. Now, Bargain is a bit like a kicker ability. It's pretty much an extra cost for an extra benefit of the card. So let's have a look at, I don't know, Back for Seconds. Back for Seconds is whenever you cast this spell, you can take 2 creature cards from your graveyard into your hand, and if you bargain, you may put one of them with mana value 4 or less onto the battlefield instead of going into your hand. So basically reanimate straight to the battlefield, only for 3 mana, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, Bargain is when you sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or a token when you're casting the spell. So for this kind of mechanic to work really well, you pretty much want to have a reliable way of generating tokens that you can sacrifice, because if you have lots of bargain spells and you don't have any artifacts, enchantments, or tokens, then you're kind of stuck and you're limited in how you can use the card. Not that Back for Seconds is bad. Without bargain, putting any 2 creature cards back into your hand from the graveyard for 3 mana is not terrible, but being able to put it out onto the battlefield straight away, like grabbing a shield red that your opponent's just killed, putting it straight back out, yeah, that's suddenly a lot more powerful, especially only for 3 mana. So it can be an artifact, enchantment, or token, but that doesn't limit it that much because there are artifact creatures, there are enchantment creatures, so certain creatures could be sacrificed to this as well. And there are lots of different tokens that you could sacrifice. There are treasure tokens, blood tokens, food tokens. You have rolls. If you have one of those cards that creates a cursed roll attached to your own creature, then you can use Bargain to remove that cursed roll token from your creature and let your creature be the base stats it's supposed to be rather than being a 1/1. But it has to be something that you control. You can't sacrifice something your opponent controls. So if they put a cursed token on one of your creatures, you can't bargain that away because that doesn't belong to you, that belongs to them. There are lots of things that can produce tokens every turn. You've got things like Jadar, Ghoul-Caller of Nephalia, who will create a zombie for you every turn. These are really great creatures to be able to sacrifice to different things. So Bargain works really well with Decayed Zombies, especially considering it can only create 1 each turn and they die if you use them. Or we have Urabrask's Forge, which will create those Phyrexian horror creatures that can attack and they get sacrificed at the end of the turn anyway. So if you can sacrifice that to a bargain, it's much better than letting the creature just go to waste and not using it for anything. And just like with Celebration, anything you have that can generate tokens every turn is going to really help you. So again, things like Planeswalkers that can +1 to add a creature If they can do that every turn, then you always have something to sacrifice to your bargain cards. So that's the bargain mechanic. The next thing we're going to look is at the adventure mechanic. So the adventure mechanic is one that has been around before. So there are cards from Throne of Eldraine that have adventure. So you might have seen some of them a year or two ago. But for the current set, for Wilds of Eldraine, we have a lot of adventure cards that can be cast for 2 different colors as well. So it's a little bit different. But basically, the idea of adventure cards is that you can cast the instant or sorcery or whatever it says on the left-hand side on the card. So for Shrouded Shepherd, it has the different spell, Cleave Shadows, which has a different cost at the bottom there, 1 and a black, and it's a sorcery, and it has whatever effect it has. This one gives your opponent's creatures -1/-1, and then once you've cast that adventure spell on the left, then you exile this card into a separate space away from your hand, and then you can cast it any time that you could normally cast it, and then it casts as the creature as well. So basically, it's kind of a 2-for-1. If you like the adventure side, if that works for you in the situation that you're in, you can cast that, or you can just cast it as the creature instead if you just need to get a creature onto the board. And there are adventures that are just in single colors, but there are also ones that work in multiple colors. So you don't have to have red in your deck to be able to play a Frolicking Familiar. You could just use it as the creature if you want to. But the adventure side just gives you that extra benefit and basically an extra virtual card because you get to use this for 2 different effects. And it's quite often that the adventure part of the card is the cheaper one. So here, Blow Off Steam is 1 red, and the creature Frolicking Familiar is 2 and a blue. But there are other ones where the adventure, the spell on the left, is actually more expensive than the one on the right. So one example of that would be the Elusive Otter, which is only 1 blue to cast it as the creature, but it's X and green to be able to cast the adventure sorcery. And obviously, when you have a card that has the cost X, you probably want to have lots of mana that you can put into it. So you're not going to be casting Grove's Bounty before you're casting Elusive Otter. So it might be that you only really want this for one side or the other. If you don't want the Otter, you can just save the Grove's Bounty and just cast that whenever you want. Or you might do something clever like play the Otter early on to get some benefit out of it, and then you can return it to your hand later on in the game and then cast the sorcery if it's better to cast it at that point. Or if you just happen to have, say, 4 of these cards in your deck, it means you have something you can play early and something you can play later on as well. So it gives you that kind of versatility. So the adventure mechanic is really useful in different decks. And there are decks you can make that really benefit from adventures because you can make it so that whenever you cast adventure spells, you get to copy it. Now, some of these might not be hugely useful when you copy it. So if you want to destroy target tapped creature and there's only one of them, copying this isn't really going to help you very much. But if you have something like draw 4 cards and discard 2 cards, being able to copy that, it's really going to make a difference. And my favorite adventure card at the moment that I haven't had a chance to really use, but I would really like to, is the Mosswood Dread Knight, because it has an interesting ability. You can cast it as the creature, and when it dies, when it's in the graveyard, you can cast it from your graveyard as the adventure until the end of your next turn. So it means the opponent can get rid of this creature, but you can bring it back next turn. So it goes to the graveyard. You then cast Dread Whispers, and casting the adventure side will then exile this and allow you to play the creature again whenever you want to. So it takes it back out of the graveyard. So yeah, there's some fun things you can do with adventure mechanics. So that covers the mechanics that we're looking at in the Eldraine set. And there are some interesting combos we can make, not necessarily with those mechanics, but in general with the cards that we have in the set. So let me know in the comments below if there are any combos that you're aware of that use just cards from this set with each other that might be infinite combos or just really powerful synergies that might help you finish a game, and any combos using these cards and older standard ones as well. So the first combo I want to show you is a combo between Blossoming Tortoise and Draconic Destiny. So the Tortoise, who has the creature type turtle, which kind of annoys me because it's clearly a tortoise, not a turtle. But never mind, let me know if that offends you as well. It gives the activated abilities of lands you control, they cost 1 less to activate. So there are lots of different things you can do with lands activate. There are lots of creature lands, or there are creature lands in the Wilds of Eldraine set. It also gives land creatures you control +1/+1, which is okay. But it's the activated ability that makes the difference. Because if you attach Draconic Destiny to a creature land, to a land that's become a creature in one way or another, then it gives the creature +1/+1, which is nice. It gives it flying and haste, which is nice as well. And it gives it the ability to pay 1 mana, and the creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And it's also a dragon, if that makes a difference to you. But being able to make a land um, have the ability of 1 mana to give it +1, and the activated abilities of lands you control cost 1 less, means that Draconic Destiny actually costs 0. Well, not the card, the enchantment. You put that on your creature, and then it costs 0 to give it +1/+0, and because it has flying and haste, there's a good chance, if the opponent doesn't have anything to block with in the sky, that you're going to be able to win with that combo. So there are a number of different ways we can animate lands. So we have something like Mishra's Foundry, so we can just have a land that can activate itself. You could have something like Wrenn and Realm Breaker, because this one can create a creature. So any land can become a creature. And then obviously also with this gives it Vigilance, Hexproof, and Haste anyway, which is really nice. So if you can then put Draconic Destiny onto that, then you've got a really decent creature to attack with. And then here's also an example of someone actually using this combo in a match. I haven't used it myself because I don't have all the cards yet. But once I do, I'll be making some decks using these kind of combos as well, because they seem pretty fun to use. As you can see, you can just keep adding that +1 to your creature. And if the opponent can't block, then you can do just enough damage to be able to finish the game against them. So, not a bad combo. You could also do something like, if you can't attack through and your opponent has too many blockers, you could also have something like Thrill Seeker. So, or anything else that when it allows you to sacrifice a creature and do damage equal to its power to something. So you could put Draconic Destiny onto a land, pump up its power up to infinite, and then you could play out Eldraine Thrill Seeker, put the +1 counter on it, and sacrifice the land as well. And also, what's nice is the ability that this gives, the sacrifice this creature, costs 1, but if you put that onto a land, it costs 0, because everything that your lands do costs 1 less. So there's a pretty good combo with the Tortoise and Draconic Destiny. So if you try that one out, let me know how it goes. The next infinite combo that I think is really fun to do pretty much uses 1 card. Well, 1 card and then different ways that you can create tokens of it. So 3 Blind Mice, which is a card I picked out in my previous video about cards I really like from the set. It can create a 1/1 white mouse, and then on turns 2 and 3, it can create a token that's a copy of another token you control. So yes, in theory, this could just make 3 1/1 mice, which makes it not as good as a wedding announcement, but kind of okay. It gives your creatures a boost at the end, but only for that turn. But if you can have something else that's a token, you can copy pretty much anything. So if you can make 3 blind mice into a token or make a copy of it, then you get to copy 3 blind mice, which means it creates another mouse, and then it can copy itself again. And then basically every turn you get more and more copies of the saga 3 blind mice, which also makes loads and loads of 1/1 mouse tokens as well. So you kind of get infinite enchantments and infinite creatures. So if you have anything that benefits from creatures entering or leaving the battlefield, or enchantments entering, or something like Hallowed Haunting, you're not casting enchantment spells every time this copies, so it doesn't trigger the main ability of Hallowed Haunting, but it will cover you need to have 7 or more enchantments in play, because it's going to make loads of enchantments by itself. Or it will also work with things like Catilda, because Catilda gets extra power and toughness based on the number of permanents you control that are spirits and or enchantments. So if you can make loads and loads of copies of 3 blind mice, then Catilda's going to get really, really strong as well. But we need to have a way of copying 3 blind mice, a way we can create a token of it in the first place. And one obvious one would be Calyx. because whenever we hit the opponent with an enchanted creature or with Calyx himself, then we can create a copy of any non-legendary enchantment we control. And 3 Blind Mice is not a legendary enchantment, so we can make that first initial token copy and then it runs away with itself. Or we could use something like Yenna from the new set. Yenna can tap for 2 mana, choose a target enchantment you control that doesn't have the same name as another permanent you control. So basically, you can't copy something if you already have 2 of them, but if you only have 1 of them, then you can copy any enchantment. So you can copy 3 Blind Mice with that, and then it runs off with itself. Or you could do something slightly different, like casting Tamiyo. And because Tamiyo has the ability to the -X ability to exile any non-land permanent from your graveyard and create a token that's a copy of it. So even if there are no 3 Blind Mice sagas on the battlefield and it's just in the graveyard, then you can exile it. It comes in as a token, it creates the mouse, and on the second turn, it can then start copying itself. So we have an example here as well of this combo in action, where you can just keep creating lots of mice and keep creating lots of enchantments. Now, even if this doesn't give you a win condition immediately, like the Draconic Destiny and Tortoise deck did, then, well, at least it's going to really help consistently create blockers so your opponent can't get through. If you're creating life when creatures enter, you're going to basically just keep building up more and more life. It's going to delay things enough that you're going to keep building up a huge board state. And if you manage to maybe destroy all other creatures, and then you can create like 10 mice the next turn, then it's going to help you win because it's very, very difficult to get rid of. The only thing the opponent could pretty much do there is something like Farewell. So look out for someone doing things like that. But apart from that, 3 Blind Mice is definitely a way to create infinite value on the battlefield. Next combo, which can create infinite mana, is working with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Now, I can imagine this card is going to be used in lots of kind of janky combo decks because it has a very interesting ability where you can exile a card from the graveyard, and if it's a creature, and if it has a well, if it's a creature, you put a +1/+1 counter on another creature you control that's on the battlefield. But it means that any creatures with +1/+1 counters on them get all activated abilities of all creatures that are exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. So any activated ability a creature could have could go on any other creature. So the amount of combinations of things here are a little bit crazy. And also, it means you can spend mana as low as any color when you activate abilities. So even if the opponent has something with an ability that's not the colors that you have, it doesn't matter. And you can exile cards from either graveyard as well. So it's generally a good card for kind of graveyard hate and stopping reanimated decks as well. So I can see lots of potential in Agatha's Soul Cauldron. It's a really cool card. One thing we can do with it is create infinite mana. All you need is something like Kami of Whispered Hopes that creates mana based on its power. So you can tap it, add some mana. The only problem is you can only do that once per turn. So if you have an ability to untap a creature, like Sleep Cursed Faerie does, for just 2 mana, you can untap it. Well, if you have Sleep Cursed Faerie in the graveyard, and then you exile it with Agatha, put the +1 counters onto Kami of Whispered Hopes, which would normally be 1 +1 counter, but Kami makes it 2 anyway. You now have a 3/3, so it can tap for 3 mana. You can untap it for 2 mana using Sleep Cursed Faerie's ability, and you can tap it again for 3 mana, and you're just generating more and more mana, and then you can use anything to finish off the opponent. One thing I like to use would be something like Light Up the Night, because you can basically just do X damage to anything. So as long as you have 20 mana, or if your opponent has more than 20 life, it doesn't really matter. They could have 100 life. You could do 100 damage to them with Light Up the Night. So it's a really cool finishing spell to have. This combo also works if it happens the other way around, which is interesting. If the Kami goes to the graveyard, then it will basically, you can exile it with the Soul Cauldron. You can put a +1 counter on Sleep Cursed Faerie. And you need this to not have the stun counters on it still, because it would be tapped already and you can't tap it. But if it's already untapped, you put the +1 counter on this, it becomes a 4/4. It can tap for mana using the Kami's ability, and then it can untap itself for 2, and then just keep going, tap itself for mana, untap for 2, and generate unlimited mana. So here's an example of this being used in a battle as well. So it's a really funny combo. It can be one that takes a while to do, especially if you only have the ability to create 3 mana and then untap for 2, because you're only really generating 1 mana every two clicks, 2 abilities. So it can be slow, especially if you're trying to produce a lot of mana, but it doesn't take that much to just keep clicking over and over again, and you'll get there eventually with the amount of mana that you need. In the majority of cases, you're not going to need to have hundreds, you're just going to need something around 20. So, again, if you can make Kami bigger, or the Sleep Cursed Faerie bigger, if it can be a 5/5 or a 6/6, then it can produce mana much faster, because it depends on the power of the creature. So let me know in the comments below if there are any other tips you've found with the mechanics, or any other infinite combos that you've seen apart from those 3. I'd love to know what you think. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching this one to the end. I will see you in the next one.